We've seen a growth of low value transactions significantly. If you look at the statistics, today we have about 19 million debit cards in Sri Lanka and about 2 million credit cards. Really talking about the debit cards, which means that average adult has about 1.4 cards today in their wallet.
One of the problems we have as a ride-hailing company, as a mobility company, so there's a lot of preference for cash. The real reason is that the ecosystem is not built, right? So a driver accepting a credit card trip, right, and then he has no way of spending that money. This is where it's broken, right? So we need to figure out ways of fixing that.
So the main challenge is habit creation. People are getting used to either hosting the card on file and then doing a transaction, or like just being happy about using their card for value transaction and trusting the system.
Hello, you're with Echelon's Turning Point, and today we're discussing if digital payment adoption is at a tipping point. And around the table here today with us are three important players in the digital payments ecosystem. So thank you everybody for joining us, and let me go around the table introducing our panel to discuss the digital payments tipping point. First, we have Jiffry Zulfer. Zulfer is founder and chief executive of PickMe. Now, Zulfer, PickMe started in the ride-hailing space, connecting taxis to customers through an app, right? But since then, you've sort of started diversifying the business. I think you have an ambition of becoming a super app. How far down this road have you come now?
Yeah, thank you, Shamindra, for having me today. I think it's been a great journey. Right? We started as a ride-hailing company, and I think it just took off. And then we realized, we're actually now bigger than a ride-hailing company, and we can now move not just people but other things also. And then we started doing food deliveries. Obviously, COVID brought up different use cases. We started doing groceries. We started doing courier services, which we call PickMe Flash. And then we realized, we can even move bigger goods. And then we started the truck business, the logistics business. So we are trying to become an everyday app, right? So that's the vision, and that's where we're trying to get to.
So how big is in the whole total mix your ride-hailing business versus everything else you have now?
Yeah, in terms of our business verticals, ride-hailing still trumps, right? It's one of the biggest business we have, but obviously the others are also following through. But we have very profitable 5 verticals that are doing really well for us.
Sandun Hapugoda is country manager for Mastercard in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Sandun, we know Mastercard as a credit card company. That's how consumers come into contact if you have a Mastercard issued credit card. But you're telling me the business is far more diverse. There's a lot more things you do. Can you sort of tell us what beyond credit cards is Mastercard?
Yeah, thank you, Shamindra, for having me today. A lot of people associate ourselves as a cards company because maybe our name carries the part of cards. But actually, we are way beyond payment cards. We are a technology company into payment cards as well. So if you look at today's context, what we do on card side is interconnecting the stakeholders, issuers, acquirers to facilitate consumers and merchants. But also we go way beyond to provide other technology services in terms of security, in terms of advisors and many other services. So half of our revenue comes out of cards business today, if you look at in Sri Lankan context. And also we go beyond the typical customers that we were serving, that is banks. And now we approach non-banking financial institutions, merchants, fintechs like PickMe and Payable, and we provide we facilitate technology to them to uplift the consumer offerings that they have.
So you're essentially a technology business that connects the ecosystem in some ways in the digital payments space.
That is correct. So we are a technology company which facilitates the players in the financial services ecosystem, but also now we go way beyond that to work with hospitals, insurance companies, and many other partners, those who are not into payments as well.
We also have Yohan Wijesiriwardane. Yohan is co-founder and chief executive at Payable. Sandun is talking about a business that's connecting the ecosystem, providing the technology that connects the ecosystem. Yohan, tell us about how Payable fits into the payments ecosystem, and I also want to ask you about the evidence you're seeing about an economic turnaround. But tell us first about how Payable fits into the ecosystem.
First of all, thanks for having me, Shamindra. So Payable is basically a payment enabler. We empower SME merchants predominantly to accept any form of digitalized payment. We are payment method agnostic. We enable anyone to accept any method that is available in a digital framework. So, when we started this business, digital payments were not at its infancy, but we had about 42,000 merchants island-wide. So now, 8 years in commercial operations, the market has grown to about 85,000 payment points island-wide. And out of that, we have about 35,000 that we have gone and taken predominantly in the long tail SME space. This is what we saw as an underserved space. Evidently, after 2019, that space is what took the biggest beating because the SME sector kind of, went through various problems from 2019 to 2023. To answer your second question, we're seeing an uptake in that industry, especially because even the tourism industry is now picking up. So you see on the southern belt, all those old merchants that were inactive, they're all starting to transact again, and they're calling us trying to get their systems activated again. So we're seeing positive things in the market. So which is good on all ends, because I think December is poised to be a really exciting month, I guess, for all of us.
So that sort of introduces us to our panel in a way also, and we are here talking about, are we at a digital services tipping point, right? Digital payments tipping point rather. And let's talk about where we are, particularly given that we are coming off an economic crisis. And I think all three of you, Johan's already mentioned, but all three of you will have a sort of view into how well consumer spending is holding up or growing, right? Zulfer, can I start with you? At PickMe now, you're a transport kind of provider. You connect people who need to go take something from one place to another or go from one place to another, right? What are you seeing now versus when we were in the throes of the crisis, which is, about a year ago?
So I think in terms of volumes have picked up, right? I think transportation is essentially a definition of economic activities, right? When people move, there is economic movement, right? So I think we see that every day, right? When you know that the volumes are up, you know that there's a lot more economic activities taking place. We have seen in the last 3-4 months that volumes have really picked up, and we're seeing that growth taking place, which is fantastic. And I think obviously, maybe I would say that there's discretion on the high spenders, right? There's obviously discretion on luxury spending. But obviously, on the low end, we are seeing a lot more volumes.
Right. So, is it fair to think that how does volumes compare against 2019?
We've certainly surpassed 2019 numbers. Yeah.
So, I suppose with value also, as in because of inflation, the value of the service is now much higher of
Correct.
the same service than it was in 2019. So you must be seeing a fairly big increase on your top line revenue.
Yes. So I think there's certainly the value of the transactions has gone up. Not as much as the inflation has gone up. I think we've managed, because of the platforms and the competition that's around, we've managed to do well. We brought in a lot of technologies to bring in a lot of efficiency, right? So that has created a very good environment. But at the same time, we are seeing a lot more transactions going through our platform as well.
Right. Sandun, the same sort of question to you, from your vantage point as an enabler of payments in Sri Lanka, you're connecting merchants to banks, to, security, to the technology backbone, etc. Right? Are you seeing evidence of an economic turnaround?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Zulfer said, we've seen a growth of low value transactions significantly. And also, if you look at the statistics today, we have about 19 million debit cards in Sri Lanka and about 2 million credit cards. Surely talking about the debit cards, which means that average adult has about 1.4 cards today in their wallet. And if you look at the activation of debit cards, it has been phenomenal during last 18 months. You were comparing it with 2019 numbers. I can quote two examples. Like around 2019-20, the entire country's debit volume was going around 60 billion rupees a quarter, and now it has come to a point that we are doing around 130 billion a quarter. So it's grown more than double if you look at the volume, which is significant. And also this
Volume as in number of transactions.
no, the value of transactions, rupees. We don't have billions of transactions.
Sure, yeah.
I'll come to that later. Also, the significant shift in terms of consumer spending behavior as well. Because if you look at 2019, the same year that you were comparing, we had about 19% contribution to number of transactions on e-commerce, the area that Zulfer represents. And today, it's going around 40-45% in between as a contribution of number of transactions to e-commerce, which also says a couple of things. One is that people are now trusting the ecosystems more, and they are okay to do a e-commerce transaction to buy something, or a ride hailing to add their card and just pay by using whatever the financial services that they can pay with. And also, it also shows that people are now adapting their digital payment methods to do low value transactions, which is a very good, I think, very good point for a developing economy, or rather a payment ecosystem.
So let me bring you in on that point, Yohan. Sandun is talking about low value transactions. You talked about the long tail. Your business counts on being able to serve that low value long tail. Little transactions all over the country, right? What are the particular challenges in doing payments in this space?
Main challenge is habit creation. So as Sandun was saying, what he's seeing is that people are getting used to either hosting the card on file and then doing a transaction, or just being more being happy about using their card for value transaction and trusting the system. So that is happening. COVID kind of acted as a catalyst to kind of push people to that, and that habits are now, you're seeing that they are getting disseminated through distributed through the entire network. In essence, in payments, in our opinion, it's basically the habit that you create within a consumer and within a merchant to trust this transaction to take place and the merchant to get their settlement, and that's basically it. Seasons act as a really beautiful thing for that. Now, for an example, we'll have some inactive merchants. December forces those merchants to get active because the push from the consumer to spend is high. And, they want to do maximum, they want to do their sales, they want to have a really good month. So that pushes that merchant, okay, now the consumer is pushing me, I need to pull my machine out of the drawer or wherever and then start transacting. They do 50 transactions from January, they can't stop because now they have created that habit with them and with their consumer also. They have created the relationship that these guys now accept digital payments, and then they catalyze that, and then that grows month on month for them. So that's the main thing, the main thing that we all, in my opinion, are trying to solve is that habit. If that habit grows, then the rest of it will just settle and work itself out.
Zulfa, I suppose your business also would like to have habit, which makes, which gives you a good, strong base of transactions to count on, right? But if you look slightly beyond habit creation also, what do you think are the next one or two challenges that you have that would result in exponential growth?
In the digital space?
In the digital space. In the digital space, in the space you're in, which is the transport solutions and also digital payments extending.
Correct, yeah. So I'll also just sort of attack the previous question also. I think it's a bit of, it's building the ecosystem, right? I think one of the problems we have as a ride-hailing company, as a mobility company, and everyone knows in this country, cash the card, right? So there's a lot of preference for cash, right? So the real reason is that the ecosystem is not built, right? So a driver accepting a credit card trip, right? And then he has no way of spending that money, So for him, it's about, how do I go and feed my children, right? I need to take this cash, right? Maybe he earned $5,000. He needs to go and buy maybe food for the children, or go to Sampakara and buy that grocery stuff, or go to a stationery shop and buy the stationeries for the children. So most of these outlets don't accept credit cards, right, or debit cards. Now that's where the problem is, right? And we know for a fact that some of the petrol sheds still don't encourage credit cards. So this is where it's broken, right? So we need to figure out ways of fixing that. As soon as we fix that, that ecosystem sort of takes off, right? And there's also cost involved in it, right? A driver accepting a cashless payment has to go to an ATM to withdraw that money. Now, what happens is when you put that ATM, there's a 20 rupee charge, right? So they all think about that. 20 rupees is a lot of money for most of these people, right? So we need to relook at this and see how do we make sure that a cashless transaction is as good, if not better, than a cash transaction.
So that seems to be the problem, right? Sandun, how can we make a cashless transaction actually better, in terms of convenience, cost, security?
Yeah, I think just to add to the same point, it ultimately boils down to two things. One is the consumer convenience. The other one is the awareness on the both consumer and merchant side. If I'm to take a minute on this to explain, consumer experience is such that I'm a heavy use of PickMe. Like whenever I use PickMe, I have no idea how I pay. And that is exactly the consumer experience that we have to extend. So you provide the service and you kind of forget the way that you paid because it's anyway happening underneath. So you tokenize your card, and there are many other ways that you can attach your bank accounts and different other ways to make a payment. But ultimately, you provide the service what merchant offers. Now, pick me, if I need to order something through a food delivery service, I'll look for the best restaurant that I can order. And if I want to go on a ride, I'll probably be worried about getting the best taxi and going from point A to point B. And I don't have to worry about how I pay. So that's the consumer convenience side. And when I'm convenient, I would definitely prefer the digital payment over cash. On the other side, the merchant side, I think it boils down to the awareness and how much of savings that they can do if they don't use cash. Because cash usage, this applies not only for drivers but also for merchants as well, where a cash cost would be about 10 to 15% in Sri Lanka. The little bit of commission that they pay to you as a ride-hailing company or general merchant pays to the POS service provider is insignificant compared to the cost of cash handling and also the overall benefit that they take.
So how do you come about that number, Sandun? About 22%?
It's a general understanding that we have in the banking sector. The cost of handling cash is somewhere between 10 to 15% in Sri Lanka today, because if you're a small shop, you have to collect cash, you have to shut the shop, you have to go to the bank. So if you put everything together, actually the smaller players, the cost of opportunity cost is much bigger compared to larger players because they can outsource the cash handling to somebody else. This is the point that we have to educate the merchants and drivers and all other in the ecosystem.
So if I ask each of you very quickly, if you look at this ecosystem and there's one or two things you can fix quickly, right? You have a wish, you can snap your fingers and you can fix one thing, maybe two, right? I'll start with you, Sandun. What are those one or two things you will fix about the ecosystem?
I would say easy picks. There are two things. One is the enablement of SMEs, which Yohan and Zulfer both spoke about. As an example, we've actually working in Jaffna with Yohan's team and the Purupala Narwa to enable this bottom of the pyramid merchant SMEs. That's important. Number two is actually doing some tricks to empower consumers to make digital payments. Well, the best one is transit that I can think of. So if you can get the consumers to use their bank card to use in a bus or a taxi or in a train, I think they will use that in a normal payment as well.
Zulfer, you can now snap your fingers and fix one or two things in the payments ecosystem. What would you choose?
I have a different view to this, right? I think the ecosystem has to grow, right? That's why I said, right? Obviously, merchants have to come out, but aim at the use cases. I think Sandun sort of touched it, right? Look at use cases that we can bring digital payments, and where the benefits are far bigger, right? Obviously, ride-hailing is one big area, right? You don't want to bother about change money and stuff like that. Maybe we should look at bigger use cases that we can penetrate into. Big one is public services, right? I wish I can make a credit card transaction to pay my taxes, pay my taxes, pay my driving licenses, pay my license for my car,
Got it.
Things like this.
Sure.
You need to enable those.
Sure.
That becomes a far bigger benefit in my view.
Sure. The same question to you, Yohan. What if you could snap your fingers and solve one or two things? What would?
For me, it would be just basically being able to onboard a merchant with a snap of a finger.
Right.
Because currently, to onboard a merchant, that is one of our largest costs in that entire acquisition process. Just the sheer effort that we have to do to onboard that merchant, to visit them, get physical documents signed, and things like that.
Right.
So that shouldn't be in your CAC. That shouldn't be your largest cost, because that just becomes then sunk cost if you can have a simple digital process. Because you have to understand, if you pivot this against cash, when people are transacting in cash, you have absolutely no idea who's transacting what. But the argument there is, if you're going to do a electronic transaction, you have to jump through all of these hoops, so then we can look at what you all are doing. But versus my understanding is, hey, you didn't have any exposure to what these merchants were doing, and now you have at least some exposure or some understanding of what these merchants are doing. So then why do you add a secondary layer saying that, so to be more transparent, you have to jump up through a few hurdles. So I feel that if the country can fix that, then more merchants will come on board. To touch on what Zulfer said on the merchant side, it's all about, like, again, I go to Sandun, he said 130 billion was dispersed through debit, right? So this will most probably be all at ATMs. Not all, but at least 8x.
So that's the POS actually.
That's only the box.
the
So
POS.
if you
Per quarter, you said, right?
POS per quarter.
so at payment,
ATMs is much.
so if you take the ATM spend, most probably is at least 8x of that.
Yeah.
So that's the bridge. So that's where we all play. So if we can, get 50% of that to come into this ecosystem will there'll be enough going through the ecosystem for us people, like, different fields, different sizes in the company, but there'll be enough there to bring everybody on board, because this is the main thing.
Right. So that's an interesting point. You're talking about, hey, government services coming online, transport coming online would really go a long way in building the ecosystem, creating habit, and making people trust this, right? Shall we talk about also the regulatory system? So this is not about bringing government services online for payments, but in terms of regulation, and Yohan just touched on the requirements that banks impose on onboarding these small merchants, right? But in your business, for instance, Zulfer, if you could fix regulation around payments first, right? What do you think are the opportunities?
Probably the wrong person to
Right.
answer this, right? I think we should start from there. I think what we have been able to do is, because there's very little regulation, for us at least, right?
Right.
Onboarding for us, a driver is not a merchant. I
Right.
don't think we are the merchant.
Right.
Pick Me sits as the merchant. So lesser the regulation, the better for us, and I think that has helped us.
Right.
So I think we should start from there. Maybe probably might have some other ideas about.
Sure. Just to get a sense about, can you give us some measures about how big Pick Me is in terms of, I don't know, maybe measures that we can relate to in terms of number of rides a day, number of food orders a day, number of transactions?
Yeah. Because of the nature of our business, it's very competitive, right? I don't want these numbers to go to our competition. So I'll keep it very confidential. But we are big enough to say that, we are as equal as the train service in the country, right? In terms of the volumes of people that we move today, right?
Right.
Obviously, in the thousands, and if not 100,000s, right? We are obviously growing as a business, and we are a very important sector in providing transport to the country.
Can you tell us about, say, top line growth, roughly a percentage? What has it been like?
So we've seen 100% growth in the last 6 months.
Right. So your business has doubled in the last 6 months.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
That's obviously been a drop, and then obviously taken off.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sandun, I'll come to you with the same question, right? So if look at the regulations that impact the payments ecosystem, if we could fix a few things, what would those be?
Yeah, I think regulation is maybe not the right word to use on this one. Actually, the policy is the right word to use probably, because I think we have to look at it in a balanced view when it comes to countries like Sri Lanka, where the payments are emerging and players are just coming into the ecosystem. As Zulfer said, having too many regulations to govern, especially on the pricing side, maybe not a great idea. As an example, today, just to touch upon Yohan's area, we have about 100,000 POS terminals, little over 100,000 POS terminals in Sri Lanka. But average POS terminal does about 5 transactions a day, despite of what we all see. We go to supermarket, we see so many transactions, but the reality is average POS is doing only 5 transactions.
This is not just Mastercard terminals. This
No,
is
no,
the industry-wide.
everybody in Sri
Right.
Lanka. All my statistics are not Mastercard
Sure.
statistics, all the market statistics. So 5 transactions a day for all card networks by using all methods. So then the problem is, if you put so many regulations on pricing and so many controls, and if you go especially on a low value or low pricing kind of approach, then nobody in the ecosystem will make money, and Yohan will decide it's not worth putting POS machines to bottom of the pyramid merchants because they don't do even 5 transactions a day. So regulating pricing and all that would be carefully touched upon. But also in the policy side, I think it has to be a net positive kind of approach. Central bank has taken quite a good set of initiatives, like Lanka QR is one of the great initiatives to put all the solo ecosystems which was running on silos to one single platform to say this is the EMV core specification that we have to follow, and then everybody has to be interoperable. And also some of the other initiatives like fintech sandbox, conversation on open banking, these are really good initiatives that we need to really further accelerate to support on the policy side of the enablement, which with a net positive attitude, in my opinion.
So on policy, then Yohan, your company is also in a way doing something similar to Mastercard, at least in part of your
So
business.
we are a Mastercard enabler, like
Enab-
so on our merchants we accept Mastercard.
And you are also providing a physical POS terminal, a
Yes.
point of sale terminal. And in your case, this is a smartphone with a little card reader of some sort.
Yes, that's one
One
form
method
factor. Yeah.
So if in this ecosystem of bringing in these small merchants into the system and also enabling people to transact with these small merchants, look at the policy landscape. What are those things that you feel we can improve on?
As Sandun touched, there has been a positive trend on policy since the last 3 to 4 years on trying to open up as much as possible, trying to make it easier to get a merchant on board. I keep going back to the merchant onboarding process, because if you make that easier, most probably more aggregators like ourselves will come on board and then start to do this as, choose this as their line of business, right?
So the friction point comes with the banks that...
It's not the banks. I think it's just collectively, I guess, central bank has a payments acceptance guidelines, and some of those guidelines were, were made a little time ago. So now it's time to kind of adopt, if you have the visibility to them, let's add a few restrictions on transaction volumes and things like that, but let's bring them on and then make the call whether this is a good merchant or not. Currently, what I see in most things in our ecosystem is that to weed off like the 5% or the 10% of fraudulent type of things, you are alienating the 90%. And all our regulations is based on, most of the time, it's always looking at that pessimistic 10%. The way I like to look at it is, if you are doing something right for the 90%, the entire ecosystem, there's some fraud or like those things are also growing, that means the ecosystem is growing. So that's, you can see, almost look at that as a positive and later on try to fix that versus trying to fix the entire ecosystem for that 10%. So we always take this slightly conservative approach to this, and that hinders growth.
I'm just trying to understand, Sri Lanka has been talking about introducing a digital ID for a long time. It appears now there is an offer from India to help with the technology that will enable a digital ID. We've had a procurement process previously. I don't think that has got anywhere. Will that enable payments in any particular way? Start with you, Zulfer.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's going to help the ecosystem in a very big way, right? So KYC becomes so much easier. Obviously the regulations have to be lightened. I don't know where the KYC is now, right? But
KYC is know your customer regulations
Yeah,
that are applicable in the
correct.
financial sector.
And with this digital ID, we should be able to do this over the counter or through systems, right? We should be able to do that through systems. And I think it just helps the whole ecosystem, right? For us, driver onboarding becomes a lot more safer, right? We can make sure that we onboard real people, right? And also we have some sort of visibility on what's happening on the ground, right? If something goes wrong, we're able to get down to the problem very fast. Right now, it's a problem, right? We don't know who he is, where he's coming from. So there's a bit of unknowns, right? But with the digital ID, it just makes it, with the right governance, it will make a far better, safer environment, but also help the digital growth.
Will this help with the cost that you're talking about of onboarding merchants? Can it potentially address that?
Yeah, definitely, because if you have the digital ID and the stakeholders accept that as enough of a KYC, then onboarding can be over a phone call. And then we can have the merchant ready and deployed within a day. So it helps greatly on cost, and it also helps greatly on time. So because when the merchant wants it, the merchant will want it. That's kind of how it is, right? They'll see a need, I need to get a digital payment enabled device, or whichever way they'll look at it. And then the sooner you can give it to them is best, right? So this will definitely help, because then that whole KYC angle, to at least to some extent, is done. And then we just need to, get the application signed, and then just be, a 14-day process can turn, we onboard merchants within 5-6 days also, depending on the urgency of the merchant. But a generally 10 to 14-day process can be a couple hours and you're good to go. So that's kind of where we should aim to move this.
Yeah, Shamindra, just to add to this, both gentlemen, the benefit of digital ID is not only for payments and onboarding, but also it will enable the entire ecosystem. Just to give you a couple of examples now, not to steal Yohan's thunder, but he has the technology to convert your Android mobile phone into a POS terminal today. So let's say you're a small business owner or individual, let's say you're a hairdresser, you run a small hostel, or tuk-tuk driver. And if you have Android phone, which is now mostly NFC enabled, you can digitally KYC the merchant and onboard in like few seconds, and then enable the merchant to accept digital payments from there on. For Zulfer, as an example, if driver wants to get a loan, if you enable digital ID and then the open banking ecosystem, you don't have to really go to a bank. You can actually request a loan through PickMe, which is the use case that I use in all my presentations. And then PickMe can shoot out to all banks through the TPPs and get quotes and display to the driver saying, these are the banks, those who are quoting different rates, and you can pick and choose what's the loan that you want to have, and driver can select that, and within matter of minutes, you can get a loan dispersed to your bank account. So not only payments, Shamindra, but also the entire economic, or rather ecosystem that can be developed on top of a digital ID. So I think that's the benefit of it.
So in a way, you are all suggesting we've made some great leaps in the last few years. But, compare Sri Lanka's ecosystem with China, which is surely a richer country than us, but their ecosystem is like 100% cashless, right? And we've seen the leaps that have happened in India. So we can't also be complacent saying, okay, we've got some gains in the last 2 or 3 years, right? And you are all leaders in this payment space. You are trying to innovate and push forward in the payment space. What do you think is holding us back?
One thing that we have to understand, we talk about digital payments growth for sure, and we are like really proud in our whole ecosystem, within our ecosystem. But what you have to understand, cash also have grown faster. Just like the digital payments, because we've been pumping cash to the ecosystem and people have to withdraw this cash through ATMs, and the cash circulation has gone significantly up in the similar nature to the digital payments. So to address to your point, it's not whether the country is rich or not. It's all about the adoption of the country of digital payments. Like if you look at Sri Lanka today, it's a 5% digital economy today that we have, versus any other country in South Asia even has gone beyond double digits. My other market in Maldives, it's 90% digital economy. So I think if we all together push this 5% to 10%, actually we all double our revenues and ecosystem. So that's why I think the importance of working together and also making people aware on digital payments and the benefits. is I think pivotal to push this, and also the policy level top down push. You came up with the example of India. So India has this top down policy to drive digital economy, which we currently not able to see in Sri Lanka. So we have the DigiCon 2030 policy, which is being implemented now, and I really hope that will have a policy which doesn't change based on the governments, to push the digital as a strategy, and also payments as a subset of that.
Are you optimistic that the government is capable, besides implementing the policy and potentially implementing a digital ID, there is more to be done, because the government is a large player in the economy, right? To create an ecosystem, the government will have to also step forward. This seems to be something that's holding us back.
Yes, government has to govern and the private sector has to run, right? It's something like that. We have to execute. So I think we need some sort of openness. There has to be participation from private sector, and the government should encourage, private sector to get involved, right? Now, when it comes to digital payments and all that, fintech has grown in many markets. We haven't progressed a lot, right? I think we're very slow. We've not made that leap yet. And I don't think the banks are the right people also, because they are terrestrial companies, right? They are, we have to have digital native businesses taking over. The thinking process is different. The cultures are different, So I think we need to review it that way and sort of, look around India, of course, China. None of the banks have done what they have done, right? It's come through digital native businesses.
Any of you want to weigh in about, if it looks like if government brought most of its functions to the digital realm, to maybe be able to interact with, make payments to government digitally, that would go a long way in creating this habit and adoption, more so than anything, it looks like.
So, the reason why economies like, I guess, we'll take China for an example, kind of went digital first is because it was not a well-banked economy. So you see apps taking off wherever it's not a well-banked. Sri Lanka is this, I haven't seen too many economies had those elements where, in 20 million people, about at least 50% to 65% was well-banked. They all had a debit card in their hand, which they evidently called an ATM card, and this was engraved in people, said that this is an ATM card, this is an ATM card, and the ATM network was extensive. So the bank, in that way, the banks did a really good job. But the problem was, you do such a good job of putting that into the mind, these people don't even know that you can use this app, POS. So they are all just running to the ATM to do that, right? So this is why you see, because they're such a well-banked community, they are not trusting the apps. They're not trusting because, they're banked, right? So when there is no financial services being offered, then the digital super apps and all of that kind of can leap, and then the whole economy leaps from banking directly into digital infrastructure. So this is why you see a little bit of this. And the way the banks or any large, as Zulfer said, they protect their territory, right? So all those apps are made. So any one of us will have 6 different apps for whatever 6 different banks that we bank with, right? They see it as a way to hold their footprint. Even our companies or their companies will look at it as, but we need to look at it as more of an open, you take transit for an example. Transit should be available at every supermarket. You just pick it up and you go and you load it wherever, right? It doesn't need to have your name and your account and all of that tied into it.
When you say transit, you mean a card with which you can make payments for transport?
Yeah, so let's say the highway for an example. If ETC was available at the supermarket, most probably we'll all have it. The reason you have to go and take your revenue license and do all of this, and what purpose does that serve?
Maybe you can go one step ahead and say enable your existing bank card that you have in your wallet to be paid.
Yes. So we've been trying to push that. We have said that we will give the RDA, we have had many conversations on our expense, a terminal to be placed in all of those, and we just can't. So not to really get much into that, but that is why that's kind of what you are seeing. The well-banked nature of the country is also holding that habits. Comes, payments or any of these things, in the end of the day, comes to your comfortable habits. And when after people get an habit, it is really difficult to break. So this is why now somebody who's growing up, in today's generation will jump directly into apps. They'll stick to that because that's the habit that they are cultivating. But this, the whole, when in the 90s, all of these accounts that we set up are still into go to an ATM, withdraw, spend.
Yeah, but we honestly can't shy away by putting the entire responsibility to the government for sure, because there's lot of things to do in the ground level as private companies as well. Because if the consumer habit is not changing, there's nothing that government can do. As an example, we've saw that during COVID times, people went online and purchased stuff from large supermarket networks, and after the COVID, and we saw a significant portion still go back to the supermarket and then do the same cash-based transactions. So there is a large part on the consumer side as well that they can do to shift this whole thing to the digital economy side.
Zulfer, we were also talking about the larger picture of the regulatory system. I mean, you are trying to create a super app, right? You would like a consumer to come into your app and do all their transactions with this, right? But you're also facing some challenges in the current regulatory setup, how we are looking at taxation, etc. Can you tell us what these challenges that you have?
This is a problem for all digital companies in Sri Lanka right now. Now, the thing about digital is that it's not a physical good, right? Yes, it is transferred through the internet digitally, right? So the government needs to look at us very differently, right? We could deliver this anywhere in the world. I could sit in Ireland, I could sit in Netherlands, I could sit in wherever in the world, and I could deliver this to Sri Lanka, right? So that's something we need to review, right? Now,
as some other companies doing the same sort of thing
Correct.
that you would do, they are based somewhere else in the world, and they
Exactly.
provide services to Sri Lanka without having an office or incorporation in Sri Lanka.
Exactly, yeah. So most of the SaaS companies, digital companies like us, so you don't need to be in the country. You don't physically need to be here, right? So that sort of, it's borderless, right? So that's where the problem is, right? And now, obviously, with the new introduction of VAT, software companies or the IT industry was enjoying an exemption over the past, 3-4 years. But now, with the tax VAT coming in, most digital companies, right, where you could deliver this over the internet, are also liable, right? So naturally, what is going to happen is a lot of these companies are going to move out of the country, right? They will set themselves up in Singapore or Dubai or Netherlands or Ireland or whatever, one of these countries that facilitates these companies, right?
Let me understand this. So now, when somebody uses PickMe for a ride, there is no VAT charged on that ride because
Correct.
you are classified as a technology company and not liable to pay VAT.
Correct.
So if VAT were introduced on rides, you would have to add 18% on top.
If VAT is introduced on software companies,
Yeah.
we would have to charge, because we would have to charge our drivers the VAT.
Right.
Because the drivers are paying for the software that they're using.
Right. Will that result in an 18% increase in fares?
No, it won't be an 18% increase on our fares, on the rides, but it'll be certainly an 18% increase on the drivers' payments
Collection.
to us.
Right.
The software payments that they pay us.
Right. So they make a certain percentage of every ride, and they'll have to pay 18%
More.
on
Correct.
top of that for
Correct.
you to reimburse the
right.
VAT. Okay. So how does one sort of address this? The government is trying to sort of widen the tax base.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you seem to be suggesting this creates an unequal playing field. Is that
Correct.
fair
So
with
one
you?
is the unequal playing field, but then the government will also lose the revenue that they're supposed to get, right? Whatever revenue that they're getting today, right? If most of us go and set up ourselves overseas, then
right.
they won't have digital companies in the country.
Right.
That's one, right? Some countries had the same problems also, right? And then the other problem is we don't have a level playing field, right? So I could have a competitor who would be set up in Netherlands, right, and operating the same thing. And that creates a very unequal playing field, right? And we'll be paying 18%, and they would not be paying any VAT.
Does this addition of a tax on digital transactions, in this case it's digital transaction, the addition of of VAT on these, does it fundamentally make your business uncompetitive?
Of course, yeah, it does, right? Because we're paying with small margins, right? And an 18% just wipes off some of our profitability, right? And that's a big problem, right? And investors also look at this, right? And they wouldn't want to invest in the local startup ecosystem, and that itself is a problem, right? So we would not see startups taking off in Sri Lanka, right?
Right.
India had a similar problem, right? A lot of the multi-billion-dollar companies in India were set up in Singapore, right? But then they brought this equalization tax, and then most of these companies, had to come and set up in India, right? Because it was disadvantage for them to stay outside the country. And everyone came and set up in India. And as we talk, there's a lot of companies still coming back to India.
Tell me if I'm right on this, Sandun. Some time ago, the government imposed a 3% surcharge on online transactions done overseas. Is that still?
It's still there. Yeah.
It's still there.
Still there on credit cards, yes.
On credit cards, not on debit cards. Is that kind of part of a solution? Is that a viable thing?
I don't think so, right? You could, because remember, there's a lot of cash taking place also, right? And there's also
What percentage of your business is running on cash versus
it's
cards?
It's 80-20 kind of thing, right? 20 digital cashless and 80
Right.
cash, yeah.
Right. Okay. Got it. So this has been a super conversation, gentlemen. I'll ask each of you to take a minute or two and quickly summarize. We'll start with you, Yohan. Any final thoughts?
Our journey of, in the last 8 years of doing this, we've seen positives in the market, and the market's grown, and it seems like it's getting poised to a nice growth trajectory in digital payment. So that's a positive for, I guess, all of us.
So we are on the cusp of a tipping point, you think?
Yeah, I think, as we said, we are still 95% cash, right? So I don't think, till we get to 49, I guess we're still 44% behind the tipping point. But for companies that are coming into this market, there's opportunity, right? So we just need to ease up a little bit and look at it as let's bring them on and then figure out what are the restrictions we need to put on them. And then as a whole, as an entire platform, we should try to create these habits of using these digital methods at merchants and even rides. So, why are they 80% is cash, right? And then, try to solve those problems, maybe make the ATM pull-outs at that level for them free. Or, because these are networks that have been around for a long time. Most probably they're not as costing as much as that would indicate, right? So that's kind of, where I want to leave my thoughts. And, I think we're poised well for a nice growth in the next year or so.
Zulfer, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think digitization certainly helps. We've seen it from our business, right? It improves efficiency, right? And if we can digitize most of the payments, I can tell you a lot of our lives become a lot more easier. We'll be a lot more productive. I've seen that in the taxi trade, like a driver and a vehicle would be inefficient. They would not be doing any work for 80% of their time, and they've just reversed, right? They're more efficient now. In fact, most of the time they are driving and not queued up in a three-wheel stand, for example, right? So that's what creates, and there's a lot more efficiency that comes in with it.
And Sandun, fine.
Yeah, I think we've been in the market for 35 years. On a lighter note, we are the original fintech in Sri Lanka. Throughout this period, I think now is the right time we see that this whole payments, if you look at digital payments, I gave you the statistics for last 18 months, have started to turn and take that hockey stick growth, I believe. If you look at the data, sheer data, it actually supports that argument. There are current ingredients set up in place, DigiCon 2030 policy, some of the initiatives from the banks, some of the initiatives from central bank. I think we have to put everything together and create that turning point and push that hockey stick growth. And just to add to earlier point, I mean, every country had their problem to move into digitization. China, probably less banks, Bangladesh, the same thing, Africa, the same thing, India, if you look at demonetization. And for Sri Lanka, this whole economic crisis that we had could be the turning point where we can push everybody to go digital and to adopt digital payments as a subset of that. And I'm quite bullish that we are going on the right path and this will take a hockey stick turn.
Jiffry, Zulfer, Sandun, Hapugoda, Yohan, Wijesiriwardane, this has been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.